يا يحيى خذ الكتاب بقوة وآتيناه الحكم صبيا إذ قال الله يا عيسى إني متوفيك ورافعك إلي محمد رسول الله.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهديه الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Surat Yusuf, this blessed surah that talks about the story of Yusuf alayhi salam in details, and the details that we all need, not more than that. Some details are of no benefit whatsoever. And that's why the Qur'an teaches us that when we even look into the details of things, we look only to what is benefiting for us. Life is short, and that's why we need to take advantage of every second of it, to be obedient to Allah, to do what is best. Sometimes there are more than one good deed are presented for the person to choose one. Which is the best of all of them? What is more rewards? What is the best of deeds? To perfect our actions, to be among the muhsineen. Not just to do deeds and that's it, but to do the best of the deeds. Since Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is the most perfect subhanahu wa ta'ala with His names and attributes. And He created everything for us in the perfect sense, for us to establish and to be upon the perfect deeds, even if the situation is not a pleasant one. As the case of Yusuf alayhi salam, when he was in prison, when he's in the well, when he was tried and tested, this is a perfect decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, perfect qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for what's going to happen as a result of this trial that Yusuf alayhi salam or any one of us face. So what is the best of the deeds to be established in the best situation that a person can be in according to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decrees? We got to learn that from the book of Allah. How to be always perfecting our actions, not to fall into sins, وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ, falling into kufr and shirk, and to do the best even of whatever deeds are presented to us or we have the choice to do, so that we can gain the best of the rewards. We reach the state in the Surat Yusuf, where we're going to go through the verses about the dream of the king's dream, after Yusuf alayhi salam has been in prison, and he interpreted the dreams of the two companions with him in the prison. And one of them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saved him, and he became close to the king. And he forgot to mention the affairs of Yusuf alayhi salam to the king. So as a result of that, Yusuf alayhi salam stayed for a few years in the prison. And then after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned the king's dream. And in between the last verse, which is verse number 42 that we talked about, and verse number 43, there might be things happened, years in prison. What happened to Yusuf alayhi salam during these years? What happened to the one that was saved when he was saved? When he was saved, when did he come out of the prison? And how close he was to the king? And what happened to the affairs of the people? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. We don't need to know that. We only need to know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Qur'an, so that we can benefit from it. And there's nothing wrong with a person in reflecting upon this. Probably many things happened, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So inshallah ta'ala we'll go through these verses from verse number 43 to verse number 49 in Surah Yusuf, and the dream of the king, and how Yusuf alayhi salam interpreted, and how this become the mean for Yusuf alayhi salam to leave the prison, for the decree of Allah to be established, for Yusuf alayhi salam to be established, and for the dream of Yusuf alayhi salam when he was a young boy to be fulfilled in the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ghalibun ala amrih. Nobody can defeat Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands something, then He would create the means to it. And this can be even against the will of the people. And the will of people is nothing basically compared to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is Al-Qahhar subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one, the most prevailing, that nobody can basically stand against the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let's go through the verses and focusing on what's mentioned there. Verse number 43. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وقال الملك إني أرى سبع بقرات سمان يأكلهن سبع عجاف وسبع سنبلات خضر وأخر يابسات يا أيها الملأ أفتوني في رؤياي إن كنتم للرؤيا تعبرون. Which means, and the king said, indeed I have seen in a dream 7 fat cows being eaten by 7 that were lean, and 7 green spikes of grain and others that were dry. O eminent ones, explain to me my vision if you should interpret visions. So this is after what's mentioned before about Yusuf alayhi salam staying in prison for a few years, and after he interpreted the dreams of those who were with him in the prison. Then وقال الملك, the king said. When did the king say that? As we would see in the context of the verses, this has happened after the one that was with Yusuf alayhi salam in the prison, after he was freed from the prison, and after he became close to the king. Then the king, he saw that dream, and he expressed this dream to the people, to those who are close to him, to see an interpretation to it. And as we would see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made this a mean for Yusuf alayhi salam to be established, because this is a dream of the king. And the king, his affairs and his actions is not just only affecting himself, his decisions and so on is affecting an entire nation. So his dream is not just for his personal affairs, but it's something that affects his nation in large. And that's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevated Yusuf alayhi salam, that with the subject of interpreting the dream, that the interpretation of the dream would affect an entire nation. And this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevated the mention of Yusuf alayhi salam and honored him. It starts from here. وقال الملك, and the king said, إني أرى, indeed I see where? In the dream. سبع بقرات سمان. And then he explains the dream. 7 baqarat, baqarat means cows. Siman, that means they are fat, they are full. يأكلهن سبع عجاف, are being eaten by 7 lean cows. Al-ijaf are the ones that are lean, very skinny, very weak. And who is eating who? The weak cows are eating the fat cows, which is opposite to what, even, of course, cows do not eat one another, but, we think that the strong ones would eat the weak ones. But in the dream, he saw that the weak ones are eating the fat ones. وَسَبَعَ سُنْبُلَاتٍ خُضْرٍ, and he also saw 7 spikes of green, وَأُخَرْ يَابِسَات, grain, and others also 7 that are yabisat, dry. And this is definitely are signs of something. And then that's why he said to the people, Ya ayyuha al-mala, O al-mala. Al-mala, usually they are the eminent ones, the strong ones, those who are close to the king. So whether the king had expressed this to his entire nation, or to those who are close to him, the people of knowledge among him, present in the presence of the king. And it shows that how people in this time, since the people in prison asked Yusuf alayhi salam, the king is asking the people close to him about the interpretation of the dream, as if this is something that was well known to them, or something that the people might have knowledge of it, or they have, they're so concerned about this. So he said to his people, Ya ayyuha al-mala, the eminent one, Aftuni fi ru'yay. Aftuni, give me the fatwa, give me the verdict with regards to my ru'ya, or dream. And the ru'ya is the dream that has an interpretation to it, something that has something beyond just the dream. In kuntum lirru'ya ta'burun, if you interpret dreams and visions, if you are upon this knowledge. And that shows actually the wisdom of the king. When he asked those who are close to him, the people that should be asked. That's why a person, when he asks for interpretation of a dream, he should ask those who he trusts the knowledge and the religion. And he made it very clear to them that if you know, that means if you don't know, don't say anything. And that's with regards to the dreams, or with regards to anything. A person should only speak based on ilm, based on the truth. Then after that, the next verse, what was the reply of the people close to the king? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in verse number 44, قالوا أضغاث أحلام وما نحن بتأويل الأحلام بعالمين. They said it is but a mixture of false dreams, and we are not learned in the interpretation of dreams. So they said 2 things. The first one, أضغاث أحلام. This is, mixture of false dreams. Al-adghath is the plural of dighth. And dighth, it's mentioned in Surah Sad, خُذْ بِيَدِكَ ضِغْثًا, which means a mixture of things. So قالوا أضغاث أحلام, they said it's mixture of dreams, false dreams. And أحلام versus رؤيا or رؤى. الرؤيا usually it refers to a dream that has a meaning to it, a good dream that has a meaning to it. But al-ahlam is usually is mentioned in the context of false dreams. That's why al-hulm from the shaitan. The hulm from shaitan whispers or makes the people, sad and miserable and things like this by making them see things that is not pleasant. That's why if a person sees something that is not pleasant in his dream, he should not explain it to anyone or relate it to anyone. And he should not even think about it. It's from shaitan. As the Prophet ﷺ said, it's not going to harm you. Don't worry about these dreams. It's not going to harm you. But if it's something that has meanings to it, as the like of these dreams, then this is one. If a person has the means to ask someone of knowledge, that he trusts his knowledge in his religion, otherwise also leave it, because there's not even, it's not a must or a mandatory thing for a person to seek interpretation of it. So this is the first thing that they said, and they said that based on no knowledge, and they should not say that without the knowledge of it. That's why the next part of the verse, they said, وَمَا نَحْنُ بِتَأْوِيلِ الْأَحْلَامِ بِعَالِمِينَ, and we are not of people of knowledge when it comes to interpreting the dreams. The second part of the verse, it might be a good thing from those who are close to the king, and it's a sign of their wisdom when they said that, because they could have said something, because it's a dream anyway, and they could have interpreted it in a way that would please the king. They would say, this is a good sign that you are going to be well established on the land, and whatever there is. But it's a sign that they were people they were truthful in what they're saying, even though they're close to the king, and they might gain great reward from the king if they interpreted as Yusuf alayhi salam did. But they were honest enough to say that we do not have knowledge of interpreting dreams, which is a lesson, of course, to each and every one of us, not to speak unless a person have a knowledge of what he is talking about. But the first part, قالوا أضغاث أحلام, so how can they say that when they said that they have no knowledge of the dreams? So this is what they reply. And then, as the next verse will talk about, the one that was close to the king, that he used to be with Yusuf alayhi salam in the prison, that Yusuf alayhi salam interpreted his dream for him, and the interpretation of the dream was true, that he was freed from prison and he was close to the king, and he will be the one that give the drink to the king. This verse number 45, he said, وَقَالَ الَّذِي نَجَى مِنْهُمَا وَادَّكَرَ بَعْدَ أُمَّةٍ أَنَا أُنَبِّئُكُمْ بِتَأْوِيلِهِ فَأَرْسِلُونَ, which means, but the one who was freed and remembered after a time said, I will inform you of its interpretation, so send me forth. So وَقَالَ الَّذِي نَجَى مِنْهُمَا, the one that was saved from among the two. See how the Qur'an is mentioning, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying, as the one that saved from among them. If you read just this verse before, without referring to the context of things, who is the one that was freed from the both of them? And that's of course referring to those who were in prison with Yusuf alayhi salam, to get the people to think. And the most eloquent in speech is the one that does not mention details in every single statement, but rather to refer things to what the context is all about. So وَقَالَ الَّذِي نَجَى مِنْهُمَا, the one that was saved, وَادَّكَرَ بَعْدَ أُمَّةٍ, that means he remembered after a time, after some time he remembered, because he forgot, as it's mentioned in the previous verses. So he remembered then, and that sometimes you might be upon something, or you forgot completely something, and then an incident happened or a statement comes across, and all of a sudden it brings you back 2 years back, in which you remember something and it become very vivid. If you were able to try to remember it before, it was very difficult. But something happens, an incident happened that would make you remember, and this is what happened to him. He said, أَنَا أُنَبِّئُكُمْ بِتَأْوِيلِ. He said, I would inform you of its ta'wil, of the interpretation of this dream. فَأَرْسِلُونَ, let me go and ask and give me the permission. He's asking the king to give him the permission, because he's going to ask someone in prison. And when someone tell a king, right, I have a solution for you, but let me talk to someone in prison, the one in prison is usually someone that the king is not pleased with. So that means that requires more clarification, or more license to do that, or more ability and ways to do that. So that he said, Farsi, set me free so that I can ask the one that I know that he would interpret the dream. Then after that he went to ask Yusuf alayhi salam. We'll talk about that inshallah ta'ala after the break. So stay with us inshallah.
محمد رسول الله محمد رسول الله.
Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. We'll come back and with verses in Surat Yusuf, verse number 43 to 49, about the king's dream and what the people replied to him by saying, this is false dreams and we have no knowledge of interpreting dreams. Then the man that was freed from prison and he was close to the king, he remembered what happened to him in prison with Yusuf alayhi salam. So he said to the king, let me have the permission to go and to ask Yusuf alayhi salam. Then the next verse, he talks whether it's himself or someone else, but the verse talks about how the dream was presented to Yusuf alayhi salam in prison and what Yusuf alayhi salam said to them. Verse number 46, it says, يوسف أيها الصديق أفتنا في 7 بقرات سمان يأكلهن 7 عجاف و7 سنبلات خضر وأخر يابسات لعلي أرجع إلى الناس لعلهم يعلمون. Which means, Yusuf, which basically he said, Yusuf, O man of as-Siddiq, O man of truth, explain to us about 7 fat cows eaten by 7 that were lean, and 7 green spikes of grain, and others that were dry. لعلي أرجع إلى الناس, that I may return to the people, perhaps they will know about you or they would know. So here he said to Yusuf alayhi salam, Yusuf, calling him with his name, أيها الصديق, praising Yusuf alayhi salam, the people of truth, أيها الصديق, the person of truth. And before he was said that you are among the muhsineen, the good doers. And he is truthful in interpreting the dreams. And the more the person is truthful, the more that he would see and interpret dreams in the proper way. So he's saying أيها الصديق. And as we know that as-Siddiq, the truthful one, the Siddiq of this ummah of the Prophet ﷺ is Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. And as-Siddiq as a title, it's a level that comes right after the level of prophethood, as a title, as a position. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned أولئك الذين أنعم الله عليهم من النبيين والصديقين والشهداء والصالحين. Those who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestowed His favor upon from the prophets, the Siddiqeen, the truthful ones, and the martyrs and the righteous ones. But when it's mentioned أيها الصديق from the statement of the person, prophets of Allah, of course, they are the highest level of sidq and truthfulness. And that's why from even among the prophets of Allah, those who are martyrs, and they are of course the best of the salihin. So not to confuse these types of terminologies. So he said, Yusuf أيها الصديق, Yusuf, or the truthful one, أفتنا في 7 بقرات سمان. أفتنا, give us the verdict again, because this is in the categories of fatwa. And then he narrated the dream again. 7 بقرات سمان, 7 fat cows, eaten by weak or lean 7 cows, وسبع سنبلات خضر, and 7 green or spikes of green grain, وأخر يابسات, and 7 dry. And then he mentioned to him the reason why he said this, لعلي أرجع إلى الناس, so that I go back to the people, because again this is a dream that is going to affect an entire nation. لعلهم يعلمون, so that they would know the interpretation of the dream, and also as if he is giving an incentive to Yusuf alayhi salam, so that they would know your affairs and you have been wrongly accused of something, and this might be the mean for you to leave the prison. So لعلهم يعلمون. And this is also gives the goodness of a person presenting a question, especially when the person might fear that he might not get an answer for, and praising the person without exaggerating in the praise, and giving him the reason why he's asking. All of these are means to get one's need fulfilled. Then Yusuf alayhi salam, he immediately interpreted the dream for him, unlike the first incident when he introduced or gave an introduction with calling them to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yusuf alayhi salam, he said in the next verse, interpreting the dream, he said, verse number 47, قال تزرعون 7 سنين دأبا فما حصدتم فذروه في سنبله إلا قليلا مما تأكلون. We'll go to the next verse. ثم يأتي من بعد ذلك 7 شداد يأكلن ما قدمتم لهن إلا قليلا مما تحصنون. And the next verse, ثم يأتي من بعد ذلك عام فيه يغاث الناس وفيه يعصرون. This is the interpretation of the dream in these verses. The first one, he said to them, قال تزرعون سبع سنين دأبا. You will تزرعون, you will plant, you will cultivate 7 straight years, right? You will plant for 7 years. And when we look at the dream versus the interpretation of Yusuf alayhi salam, this is not intended for us to learn how to interpret dreams, but it's showing us how Yusuf alayhi salam interpreted the dreams. So he interpreted the cows as basically the years of planting. The cows refers to the years of planting. So تزرعون سبع سنين, that you would plant 7 years. And then he is given advices to them while he is interpreting the dream. So before we get into the advices, he interpreted the seven cows to be the 7 years. And the fact that 7 are fat, that means it's full of provisions and goodness and so on. And the lean, the weak ones, that means the years of drought and the scarcity of things. And the spikes of grain, this is with regards to the provisions itself. Not the planting, but the provisions, the outcome, the things that the people would eat and so on. Whether it's green, which shows the benefit of it, and the dry one, when basically what needs to be saved, as he would advise them, because of the lack and the scarcity of food and provisions as a result of this. So going back to the verse and the interpretation of the dream, he said, قَالَ تَزْرَعُونَ سَبْعَ سِنِينَ دَأَبًا, that you would plant for 7 years consecutively, because there's abundance of things. فَمَا حَصَدْتُمْ فَذَرُوهُ فِي سُنْبُلِهِ. He's given them the advice then, which is the fatwa, or the interpretation is not just to give the interpretation, but also giving them means of fixing the situation that they're about to face. That you would plant for 7 years consecutively, and what you harvest, فَمَا حَصَدْتُمْ, al-hasad is the harvesting, leave it in the spikes. فَذَرُوهُ فِي سُنْبُلِهِ, leave it in its spikes. إِلَّا قَلِيلًا مِمَّا تَأْكُلُونَ, except a little from what you will eat, because of what's coming ahead. And as we would see inshallah ta'ala in the benefits of it, what's the benefit of leaving it in the spikes, whether it's for so that it doesn't go bad, because once it leaves the spikes, it's more easy for it to be rotted and so on. So leave it, because you use of it less than what you would usually use in the normal time. So you would plant for 7 years consecutively. So he's advising them, leave it in the spikes and only take what is necessary for you to eat, and eat less. And then afterwards, ثم يأتي من بعد ذلك سبع شداد. Then come after the 7 good years, consecutively planting in them, tough years to come, difficult years, 7 difficult years will come afterwards. And since the years referring to the cows, so one is fat and one is lean, so this is a shidad, or the difficult ones are like the lean ones. ثم يأتي من بعد ذلك سبع شداد يأكلن ما قدمتم لهن. They would eat, they will consume what you saved for them. So it's like, as mentioned in the dream, the lean and the skinny, the weak 7 cows would eat the fat cows. So this is basically what's going to happen to them, that the 7 tough years, the 7 difficult years when there's no harvesting, would eat what you have saved in the 7 years of consecutively planning or planting. So ثم يأتي من بعد ذلك سبع شداد, 7 tough years, 7 difficult years. What's the sign, or what's the characteristics of these difficult years? يأكلن ما قدمتم لهن. They would consume, they would eat what you have sent forward with these 7 years. When you planned the matter in the proper way so that you can save food for 7 tough years, it will finish what you have saved. إلا قليلا مما تحصنون, except little what you used to save. And that's the wisdom again of planting and having the proper planning of what's coming ahead, because of the drought years that he mentioned. And then after that he said ثم يأتي من بعد ذلك عام. And then after these 7 tough years, so 7 good years, 7 tough years or difficult years, then after these 14 years, a year would come. ثم يأتي من بعد ذلك عام فيه يغاث الناس وفيه يعصرون, that people will be given rain, in which also they will have press, or pressing olives and grapes and so on. So a year would come afterwards where people يغاث الناس. يغاث الناس from al-ghayth. Al-ghayth is the rain. So the rain will come and the goodness will come after the 7 tough years. وفيه يعصرون, and they will in this year يعصرون, as it's mentioned in the interpretation of the dream of the two people in prison. Al-asr is to squeeze or to press something. So then they will have the ability to press what they gain from the fruits and the grapes and so on. So they will go back to means of having abundance in things, and the scarcity will go away and so on. So this is the interpretation of the dream by Yusuf alayhi salam. And it has great wisdom, of course, and that's why when the king heard about it, he immediately asked for Yusuf alayhi salam to come to him. By the wisdom of the king and knowing that this is such a great interpretation of what he said, and having the concern towards his people, how to save himself and his people from what's there coming ahead of them with these droughts and so on. So as we would see here, that these verses or this interpretation of the dream by Yusuf alayhi salam was means for establishing Yusuf alayhi salam on the face of earth. And that's why the next set of verses we'll talk about inshallah ta'ala next time, it's all related to one another, how this was a mean for Yusuf alayhi salam to be saved from the prison. But it also shows the truthfulness and the sincerity of Yusuf alayhi salam. He is someone in prison, and he could have withheld the interpretation of the dream, or he could have gave an introduction to the same way that he did before by saying, I'm not going to give you the interpretation of the dream because you guys have put me in prison in an unjust way, so I'm not going to make any benefits for you. You have to free me from the prison first. And he would put conditions for himself or ask for a certain amount of money before he gave the interpretation of the dream. He did not withhold any of the knowledge, but rather he was generous, and that's why he is Kareem, he's generous. He gave that interpretation of the dream without even asking, without even hoping for any benefit for his own self this time. He left the matter to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He gave what is benefiting for the people, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed for him to benefit from this a great deal, as it will be mentioned inshallah next time. But before we get into the benefits of these verses, which is something that we'll talk about inshallah ta'ala after the break, so stay with us inshallah.
محمد رسول الله محمد رسول الله.
Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Welcome back, and with verses in Surah Yusuf, verses number 43 to 49, and the king's dream, and the great benefits that we can learn from this, and to see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can give by His permission signs of what's going to happen in the future of the people, as a way to warn them, as a way of giving them glad tidings, means of steadfastness. And this is one of the benefits of the dreams that people would see, is to benefit themselves. Sometimes a person would see a dream about the hereafter, the Jannah, the hellfire, and that's something that can bring the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the heart of the person, so that becomes an admonition to oneself, so that the person would repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or something, as we heard, the king, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, got to see something, whether that king was a believer or disbeliever, but he got to see something that would affect his life in this world. So it shows that a person is a disbeliever might see something in his dream that would have an interpretation to it. So not just the righteous ones, but the righteous ones, they would see from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestowed His favor upon them, of what is benefiting for them in the ultimate sense. And when we see the Qur'an, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned the details of these dreams, and how Yusuf alayhi salam interpreted, and to be careful as a common person not to rush into interpreting dreams, even if it has some similar signs that is mentioned in these verses. Like if a person sees a cow in the dream, he should not rush in interpreting that this refers to years or things of that nature. Again, refer it to the people of knowledge, and at the end, it's not something for an individual to base or to change something in matters of religion, of course, or to do something that might cause a person to be presented to any means of harm, but to take precautions. There's nothing wrong with taking precautions as it happened. And it's always good, as this is one of the great lessons to learn, it's always good not to be heedless of what might happen in the future. It's not having bad expectations of Allah, But if you see yourself, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you abundance of wealth or health, right? Don't be deceived by this, and you would waste all of your wealth and waste your health in not basically putting something forward to what's coming ahead. People do this when they have the wisdom and their hearts attached to this world. People save for their retirement, for example, right? And they would say, or they would see that this is one of the wisdom that they have, to save for their retirement, because when a person is old, is not able to gain money or work, so they would put something aside. Sometimes they would save for the college of their children, for example, or things that might happen in the future, or just saving something for what happen in the future. So this is always a good thing. And even the Prophet ﷺ, he would store the provisions of a year. So whether it's, as long as a person is fulfilling the orders of Allah and paying zakah, there is nothing wrong with saving, but also to pay attention not for the person to be wasteful. And then as Umar radiallahu anhu, he said a statement more or less of the meaning, إِخْشَوْشَنُوا فَإِنَّ النِّعْمَةَ لَا تَدُومُ. إِخْشَوْشَنُوا, that means make yourself a little bit tough, because the favors are not always continuous forever. So if you find yourself at times of ease, think of what's going to happen if you lose that means of ease. So put something aside, invest in a proper way, whatever there is, with the hearts being attached to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and with fulfilling the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is when the king saw these things or these signs in his dream. One of the great benefits to learn is to ask the people of knowledge. He did not say, I'm a king, it doesn't matter, or I would have the knowledge of the matter by my own self, but rather he referred the matter to those who are close to him. That's why the importance of those who are close to the people of authority is crucial to the entire nation. That's why one of the dua that a Muslim would even make for the people of authority is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guide them to have righteous advisors. Because if the advisors to the king that are not righteous, they can lead him and lead the ummah, the nations, astray. So to have close people to yourself that are righteous is always a benefit for the person to be guided to do what is right. And not just for the people of authority, but every single one of us. That's why we have to have that closeness to the people of knowledge and to ask the people of knowledge, because there are many different variables in our life and many different things that if a person is not guided, he's going to be misguided. So the person does not regret his decisions and so on. So this is a great benefit to learn. And also one of the benefits to learn is that a person should not rush into talking about matter without knowledge. One of the worst things that happens in this life is that everybody talks about everything. And when people are confused about where the proper knowledge, who is the one to ask, right? This is a misery. And that's why when people are upon knowledge, they are safe. When they know what's the truth, and then they follow the truth. But when they do not know where the truth is, and when people will talk without knowledge, this can be means of deviation and confusion to many people. And that's why when the people, those who are close to the king, when they said, وَمَا نَحْنُ بِتَأْوِيلِ الْأَحْلَامِ بِعَالِمِينَ, we have no knowledge of interpreting the dreams, this was a great benefit to their nation. Because again, as we said, if they rushed in interpreting the dream, and there are things to entice them to interpret the dream. Why? Because they're close to the king, and anyone close to the king or to a person of authority, he wants to gain his liking and that the king would trust him. So he would take that opportunity to say words of praise to the king, or you will be the best man and things of that nature. But they didn't say anything because they knew that this is an important matter. And what really matters is to be of a source of advice to the people, and not to be just rushing into praising oneself. And the importance of not interpreting dreams unless a person has the knowledge of it, and to keep it close to the one that saw the dream, and not to expose it or to make it to the entire world to hear about it. And this is one of the things that we need to be patient with in the world that we're living today, that not everything has to be exposed and the whole world has to know about it. Some things that you would only talk to those who are close to you, especially of things that is benefiting for oneself, and it's a great knowledge that we need to be upon. Also, one of the great benefits that we learned from this is that sometimes a person forgets, and the shaitan makes us forget certain things, as the shaitan made the one that was freed from prison to forget about Yusuf alayhi salam for the decree of Allah to be established, for Yusuf alayhi salam to be tested more, to stay in the prison. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is above all, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permitted for the men to remember. And as a result of that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestowed His favor upon Yusuf. We learn also from giving the proper praise of a person is not always a bad thing, even though we have to be careful not to be or aiding the person with matters of evil by making the person arrogant, rather to motivate the person, or to, as the man asked Yusuf alayhi salam, why did he ask him? Because of the status of Yusuf alayhi salam. And the verses repeated the dream again, and he mentioned the reason behind what he's asking for, and giving him the the reason for that. Then the great benefit also that we learn from this, that how Yusuf alayhi salam, and that shows the honor that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestowed upon Yusuf alayhi salam, someone with decency, someone with great manners, that in this time when he was interpreting the dream, he did not give a long introduction to it, but rather he interpreted, and not just interpreted, but he gave them what to do, because they're about to face something difficult. And for them to face these difficulties, they need to have certain measures to be observed, and he gave them that when he's in prison, when he did not ask for anything, any favor. He did not ask them to free him from prison and he'll be able to take care of it. Right? And as we would see even how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honored them in the next verses, set of verses, that he even refused to go out of prison unless for people to see that he was innocent, so that people do not think that he was taken out of the prison because of the status that is close to the king, or because of the interpretation of the dream. No, he need to have very clear that he came out of the prison because he was wrongfully admitted to the prison, that he was innocent, to prove his innocency, that he is someone of honor and dignity. So again, it shows the manners of Yusuf alayhi salam and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honored them with this. So that's why he advised them. And this advice is something that people of authority and nations can learn from this as signs of how to save things, and to save the ways that people live in nations, how to sustain their life, from what Yusuf alayhi salam said, and to always plan for the future, and not to be deceived by the immediate sense of things. And more than one time you would find someone that was very rich, extremely rich, but they did not have the wisdom of saving something for what might be hidden from them with the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they end up being in severe difficult situations because of the lack of wisdom. So to learn from this is to be wise, and to even raise our children to be wise. And that's why the ulama in the early generations of Islam, when they say that once in a while make your children in a day eat nothing but bread, there's nothing wrong with that. But for every time a person is hungry, he has to fulfill his desire and eat the best food there is. This is our desire. There's nothing wrong with eating good food as long as it's halal. But as a way of upbringing, that a person prepare himself. If difficulties happens, he's prepared for it, so that he's not terrified, so that he is not panic, right? But to be tough in certain situations, so that he'll be able to face tough situations. That's why, as a matter of ways of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on earth, those who live luxuriously in life, they're not able to face difficulties in their life. That's why you would find in some nations where there's so much spoiled, if it's correct to say, with worldly means, then the most difficult thing, once a difficulty that they face, many of them would commit suicide, or fall into the trap of being mentally sick and things of that nature. Why? Because they did not raise themselves to be tough and to be patient. And those who live in a tough situation, or they face difficulties, they're more stronger to face difficulties in life. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us, even in the interpretation of the dream. And even someone, they said, which is a great benefit, when there is times of difficulties, then the ease comes. And that's what it says, after the 7 tough years, a year come with abundance of things. So the ease will come. And one of the ways is that a person, when he's facing difficulty, be at ease. Why? Because the ease is coming. So hope for the ease to come. And make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and be wise and be patient. And that's what we learn also in the Qur'an. وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ أَلَمْ نَشْرَحْ لَكَ صَدْرَكَ وَوَضَعْنَا عَنْكَ وِزْرَكَ الَّذِي أَنْقَضَ ظَهْرَكَ وَرَفَعْنَا لَكَ ذِكْرَكَ فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا إِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا. Indeed, with difficulties there is ease, and with difficulty there is ease. Repeated twice. So there's always the ease comes after the difficulty, and this is what happened, and this is what He gave them as a plan for them to pass these difficult years with wisdom, with goodness, so that they would see the benefit of it. After that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned the verses afterwards about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestowed His favor upon Yusuf alayhi salam, and also verses that shows the honor and dignity and the good manners that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestowed upon Yusuf alayhi salam. But this will be next time, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us life. And till next time, I leave you with the protection of Allah. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
إلا الذين تابوا وأصلحوا وبينوا فأولئك أتوب عليهم وأنا التواب الرحيم.
فادعوا الله مخلصين له الدين ولو كره الكافرون.
يا زكريا إنا نبشرك بغلام.
يا أيها النبي إنا أرسلناك شاهدا